They told us the vote was just a formality, that expanding the Ridgeview development into the northern slope was urgently needed for community growth. But I knew something was off the moment they rushed the proposal through in a snow-heavy November without so much as a risk analysis. I've seen this kind of maneuver before, back when I was still with the State Emergency Oversight Unit. We'd catch developers suppressing soil reports, misclassifying zones, paying off independent engineers to tweak projections. But that was then. Now I was just another homeowner in Montana, shoveling my drive-paying dues and watching the HOA warp from neighborly governance into a cartel of silence and cement. It started with a whisper at the mailbox. A neighbor I'd barely spoken to, Miriam, who lived down on Willow Glen, murmured they ignored the report, the one from Weatherstone Labs, the snowpack projection. I blinked. What report? She shook her head and walked away fast. Didn't even wait for me to answer. That night, I stayed up combing the county's public records portal digging for Weatherstone's name. Nothing. No filings, no attachments. Just the HOA meeting summary which voted 5-2 to approve Phase 3 expansion of the North Ridge lots. No appendices, no citations, no soil integrity study. But I noticed something else. In the metadata of the meeting's PDF summary, hidden under the document properties, was a mention of a file WSN_packload24_V4.pdf. It was never attached, and I knew that acronym. Weatherstone Snow Load Network. That was a vendor we used when I worked cases involving ski lodges and avalanche-prone builds. I didn't sleep that night. Next morning, I visited the HOA office. Cold brick building off Oak Run. Clipboard girl at the front smiled way too wide. I'm looking for any reports filed by Weatherstone Labs during the last 2 development reviews, I said casually. Her smile faltered. I'm sorry, sir, those are internal HOA. Board materials aren't subject to public view. Without board approval. I nodded, thanked her, left. Didn't argue. Didn't show my hand. Instead, I submitted a FOIA request. Not to the HOA, they're private, but to the State Emergency Commission. Because if Weatherstone sent that report to any state office, it was public record. And they'd have a copy. The next day, I started walking the northern ridge with my snow stick and notebook. I used to measure slab shifts and crust density in avalanche zones for a living. Old habits die hard. There were cracks already. Hairline fractures in the slope right above the lots, where the new homes were half-framed. Trenches dug for runoff pipes were shallow, too shallow. They were trying to control meltwater with the cheapest, narrowest channels. And the grading, it looked like a drunk bulldozer had done it. Slabs of disturbed snowpack pushed into makeshift berms. One strong storm and the weight load would shift into those structures like a truck into tissue paper. Still, my concerns alone meant nothing. So I started documenting. I time-stamped every photo. Used my old Olympus Digital to avoid any metadata tampering. On day 4, I caught a contractor no license plate dumping bags of salt into one of the snow trenches. Salt. That's not snow control, that's snowmelt acceleration. It makes the ground wetter, weaker, more prone to slip. That night, I set up a trail cam in the tree line behind Lot 47. The snow was falling heavier now. We were 2 weeks out from the storm NOAA had started calling the Beast of the Bitterroots. But Ridgeview HOA didn't care. They sent another newsletter that day. Construction continues as scheduled. Snow services secured. All is under control. That phrase haunted me. All is under control. By the end of the week, my FOIA came back. The Weatherstone report was real, dated 3 months prior. Concluded that snowpack on the northern ridge exceeded safe structural thresholds by 47% for any foundation not anchored beyond 6 feet. Recommended no development without geotech mitigation. And guess what? The HOA never forwarded that report to members. They received it. They acknowledged it in one internal email thread I got through FOIA. But it was buried, deleted from member-facing packets, left out of all recorded meetings, swept under the ice. That weekend, I printed the report, stapled it to a corkboard, and pinned a copy of the HOA's last newsletter beside it. Underneath, I wrote one word in Sharpie lies. I set it up inside my garage, turned on a heater, invited 3 neighbors I trusted. Miriam came. So did Caliban, old schoolteacher, and Jasmine, a veteran nurse, whose driveway was now overshadowed by one of the new builds. They didn't say much when I finished presenting, just nodded. And Caleb said, "We need more than a bulletin board, Nate. We need leverage." I nodded, and said the words I hadn't said in years. Then we built a case. The first violation notice came 3 days later, folded tight in a bright orange envelope and duct-taped to my door like some kind of threat. Yard maintenance, non-compliance, level 3, fine $280. I stared at it, blinking at the words like they might rearrange themselves into something sane. My yard hadn't changed in years. Neatly trimmed pines, crushed stone border, no weeds, no trash. But now, conveniently, they claimed overgrowth and debris accumulation, a lie made visible only on paper. I knew this wasn't about shrubs. It was a message. I'd poked the bear, and now the bear was awake. By the time the second notice came, this one accusing me of improper fence height, I started cataloging every piece of paper. Photos, date stamps. I created a spreadsheet with columns for violation code, date issued, fine amount, description, my time-stamped counter evidence. The third notice arrived as a certified letter. Failure to comply with board directives may result in lien proceedings. That's when it got real. I'd seen this tactic before back when I was still in the DA's office in Missoula. HOAs. With something to hide, always escalate fast. It's not about the rules, it's about fear. Flood you with threats until you back off cell or go quiet. But they picked the wrong guy. I pulled out my old portable scanner, hooked it to the laptop, and began digitizing everything. Every warning, every envelope, every signature. I even photographed where and how the letters were posted. They'd crossed a legal line. Selective enforcement, that's breach of fiduciary duty. Threatening liens without basis, that can lead to civil penalties, especially if part of a documented pattern. I called Jasmine that night. "They're hitting you too," she asked before I even finished my sentence. "Yeah, yard fine. Fence fine. Lien threats. It's coordinated." "Same here," she said. They fined me for an unauthorized structure. It's a bird feeder. Been there since 2016. That's when I knew we weren't targets. We were examples. The HOA was sending a message to the neighborhood: this is what happens when you speak out. So I started knocking on doors, quietly, after dark. Snow muffling my boots as I made my rounds. Miriam. Caleb. The Marshalls at Lot 12. The Delgados behind the ridge. 10 houses. 7 had received fines within the last 2 weeks. All of them had either signed the original petition to delay Phase 3 or attended the garage meeting. And none of them had violations before. I created a second spreadsheet, labeled it Retaliation Pattern. Each name, each fine, each date, and a simple Y under the attended meeting column. It was undeniable. But I needed more than suspicion. I needed evidence. Hard, irrefutable, procedural proof. So I sent Caleb into town to request HOA meeting recordings. Under Montana's Common Interest Community laws, members are entitled to access board meeting minutes and records unless explicitly exempt. They stonewalled. Said the last 2 meetings were not recorded due to weather disruptions. Interesting excuse, considering both took place over Zoom. Meanwhile, I installed 2 more trail cams, one pointing toward the Ridgeview construction trucks documenting who entered the northern lots, another watching the HOA office parking lot. And I went further. I dug out an old voice recorder one I used back in the day to record witness statements and placed it in my coat pocket. Every conversation, every warning, every just between us moment, I captured it all. Then came the night when I got my first break. I was at a community dinner. One of those forced smile HOA-sponsored potlucks in the gymnasium. Plastic trays of chicken. Kids running through the folding chairs. Fake cheer like icing on mold. I overheard 2 board members, Carl and Denise, talking near the kitchen. "He's trying to scare the board," Carl said. Denise replied, "Let him. We've got enough on him to bury him in fees. I already flagged his lot for snow berm obstruction." They laughed. That's when I clicked the recorder on. I kept walking past them. Didn't even flinch. Let their voices trail into my jacket pocket. Snow berm obstruction. That wasn't a real code. I checked the HOA bylaws that night. No such violation. It was fabricated, just like the rest. I added fabricated violations as a new tab in my spreadsheet. I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was building a RICO-style pattern. Coordinated retaliation, use of false citations, suppression of opposing viewpoints, financial harm as enforcement. By the end of that week, I'd collected 14 notices from 6 neighbors, all targeting people linked to snowpack concerns or opposition to Phase 3. Jasmine was shaken. She called me crying after receiving a second lien threat. I'm a nurse, Nate. I've worked double shifts during every storm since 2021, and now they're saying they might take my home. I told her to hold tight. Help was coming, because I had a plan. I dusted off an old contact, Matthew Reeves, former AG auditor. We hadn't talked since I left the prosecutor's office, but when I texted him, got a retaliation finance pattern inside a rogue HOA. Need a forensic look. He called back in under an hour. I'll be there Sunday. I smiled, because now I wasn't alone. The HOA wanted to drown us in paperwork and fear, but they forgot one thing. I know how to swim in this storm. The blizzard arrived early. Forecasts said Wednesday. It hit Sunday at dawn. Sheets of snow like shredded glass poured from a sky gone slate gray. By midday, roads were impassable. The wind screamed through eaves like something alive. But I was ready. Because that Sunday morning, while the neighborhood clutched their coffee mugs and watched the whiteout from behind double-paned glass, I stood alone on the tree line, retrieving what I hoped would change everything. The trail cam. Buried under 5 inches of powder. Battery-drained lens, fogged but intact. I brought it back to my workbench, thawed it slowly, and pulled the SD card. What I saw confirmed every hunch I'd logged for weeks. They're time-stamped at 2:12 a.m. on a Tuesday, 4 full days, after the HOA declared construction would pause for weather, were 2 unmarked trucks unloading insulation siding and workers in heavy boots. Floodlights. No permits, no safety rails. They were still building during the storm window. Reckless, illegal. But more importantly, undeniable. I took stills from the footage marked each timestamp and built a timeline. Worker arrival, material drop, movement patterns, load points on the frames. At 2:56 a.m., a worker slips off a beam. No harness. He catches himself on the scaffolding. They kept going. I packaged everything into a digital file labeled Night Operations, Ridgeview, February 3rd, then uploaded it to an encrypted cloud folder. The next day, I visited Jasmine and Caleb. We huddled in Jasmine's garage using a portable heater for warmth and a lawn chair as our meeting table. I opened my laptop and hit play. They watched in silence. Jasmine finally broke it. They're not just ignoring risk, they're creating it. Caleb nodded. You said they cut corners on materials. Think they're using cheap framing too. I showed them a paused, frame zoomed in on a sticker. It read DLAM812. A discount grade laminate we knew from past cases failed under heavy loads. Definitely not rated for snow this deep, and it was about to get deeper. That night, I climbed to my attic, pulled down the old hard case from my investigator days. Inside the FLIR thermal camera. Not the cheap kind. The kind that read temperature stress through walls. The kind we used when investigating insulation fraud or structural leakage in government buildings. The next morning, I ventured into the storm, covered my body cam in a waterproof sleeve, and crept up the ridge. No one was out. Snow had buried the lots up to the first story. But one of the homes, lot 49, had exposed insulation that looked wrong. I pointed the FLIR and let it scan. The reading came back bright red in one corner. That meant heat leak, which meant no proper sealing, bad paneling, internal stress in the framing. A leak like that lets snowmelt seep into support beams. It freezes, expands, cracks. Then the whole thing fails. I logged the thermal footage, geotagged it, saved to drive. By evening, Matthew Reeves arrived. He was half-frozen trench coat white from snow. But when I opened the door and he saw the wall of photos, timestamps, reports, I swear he smiled, like a detective stepping into the one case that still mattered. "You weren't kidding," he said. "This is a rat's nest. We gotta work." Matthew had brought his own tool, say forensic ledger scanner database access, two HOA contractor licenses, and a drive with case templates for fiduciary breaches. He started with the bank ledgers. Within an hour, he found the first red flag. Snow management budget, $43,200, paid. But no snowplows had been seen. Not once. Matthew cross-checked vendor names. The payment went to Northern Terrain Services. He clicked, paused. "It's a shell," he muttered. "What, this LLC has no real address, just a mailbox in Missoula." And guess who filed it? He turned the screen. There it was. Denise R. McAllister, Vice President of Ridgeview HOA. They paid themselves, pretended it was snow removal, pocketed 40 grand while neighbors shoveled with their bare hands. Matthew logged the entries, saved account numbers, and documented the pattern. "This is beyond negligence," he said. "This is embezzlement. Classic misappropriation of common funds." I uploaded everything to a drive marked Snow Fund Fraud. The next morning, I sent an anonymous tip to the Missoula County Press. Subject line, "Where did the snowplow money go?" I attached one frame from the night cam showing trucks at 2 a.m. and a quote from the ledger. No name, no signature, just the truth. By sunset, the article was online. HOA under fire for dangerous winter, builds missing snow budget. The neighborhood buzzed. People started talking again outside despite the cold. I watched from my window as couples pointed to the ridge. A few even came to my door asking, "Is it true?" I said nothing. Just handed them a USB, one file, C_4_yourself. That night, the wind howled harder. The snow deepened, and up on the ridge, a frame cracked in the dark, audible, even from my porch, like a scream muffled by powder. The storm wasn't done, and neither was I. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house, every groan from the trees under heavy snow set my nerves on edge. But it wasn't the storm that kept me up. It was the thought of how close we'd come to living under a regime of silence, and how many still were. At 6:03 a.m., I got a text from Matthew. "Working on deeper ledger pull. You won't believe this next part." I made coffee, sat down, and opened the shared drive. A new folder had appeared, HOA. General Ledger, 24 months. Inside were raw exports from the HOA's own accounting system. He'd pulled the entries through a subpoena-level database, Extract Legal, because one of our neighbors, Sandra Delgado, was a former HOA treasurer who still had dormant access. Sandra had joined our cause quietly. Her house sat just beneath the unstable slope. She had 2 kids. And when she realized the HOA had built their newest homes above her, without proper drainage or permits, she agreed to help. The entries told a story clearer than any speech. Line 234, Community Beautification Grant, $8,900, paid to Clear Sky Events, LLC. Clear Sky had no website. No presence. We checked the filing address, same P.O. box as the snowplow company. Another fake. Line 261, Winter Safety Enhancements, $12,500. Paid to personal account, Carl J. That was direct. A board member paying himself with HOA funds. And then we found something bigger. Line 297, Emergency Structural Consulting, $18,000. Vendor Ridgeview Resilience Initiative. I stared at that one. RRI wasn't real. I knew every structural vendor licensed in the state. This one had no license, no EIN, no filings. Matthew dug deeper. "It's a ghost ledger entry," he said. "This line only appears in the export, not in the member summary reports. They had 2 books, one for board review, another for public release. That was deliberate fraud, layered, textbook case." Matthew nodded slowly. "We have enough now to allege a pattern. Not just financial mismanagement, but racketeering-adjacent activity. Could mimic a RICO complaint." I felt the ground shift under me. Not literally, but in the sense that I suddenly knew this was bigger than snow or fines. This was a machine, one running off the silence of good people. We didn't have to wait long to see the fallout. That afternoon, the local paper dropped a second-piece board member paid self from Emergency Snow Fund. They had tracked down Denise McAllister's LLC filing. It was public record now. With screenshots, the HOA scrambled. They sent out a damage control email titled Clarification on Community Finances. It was 4 paragraphs of vague language, no numbers, no accountability, just buzzwords like reinvestment, strategic outsourcing, and temporary contracting partnerships. But it was too late. Sandra forwarded us the internal chatter someone had mistakenly left her HOA email loop active. She blind copied it all to me. Denise, kill the ledgers, remove RRI entries ASAP. Carl, legal exposure growing. Stop all comms with residents. Brenda. This is retaliation. We should consider emergency session vote to remove Nate and others from community roles. That one stopped me cold. They were planning expulsion, actual removal. I read it twice, then I smiled. Because that line was all I needed to prove motive in a legal action. We had ledger fraud, self-dealing retaliatory action against whistleblowers, suppression of warnings about structural collapse, coordination across multiple board members. That night, I opened a new folder, titled it Preliminary Case, Civil Action, Ridgeview HOA. Inside, I began drafting the complaint. Count 1. Breach of fiduciary duty, failure to disclose material risks, misallocation of funds, retaliation against concerned members. Count 2. Civil conspiracy, coordinated efforts to conceal financial misconduct and suppress dissent. Count 3. Negligence disregard of expert warnings resulting in foreseeable risk to property and life. Count 4. Equitable injunctive relief to halt construction, freeze accounts, and prevent expulsion of whistleblowers. Matthew added his name as a co-complainant. Sandra and Jasmine signed on by evening. Caleb was nervous, but he said, I've lived here 30 years. This used to be a neighborhood, not a racket. I'm in. That night, I took one final walk to the ridge. Snow fell quietly now. The wind had softened, but the weight of it all hung heavy on the homes above. I could see stress lines in the siding hairline cracks where the beams had started to buckle. I aimed the FLIR once more. The color was brighter, more heat loss, more moisture intrusion. The freeze-thaw cycle was accelerating. I took one last reading and whispered to the darkness, you don't get to bury this, not anymore. And the ridge groaned just once, like it was listening. The blizzard was still swirling when the envelope arrived. Plain white, no return address, just the seal of the Montana Emergency Services Division faintly embossed in the corner. Inside, a printed transcript of internal emails obtained through my FOIA request, 17 pages, time-stamped, verified, and damning. The subject line on the first one read, Re-Snowpack, Hazard Analysis, Ridgeview HOA Development. And there it was, clear as black ink on white paper. From Mark Lerner, Weatherstone Labs, to Ridgeview HOA Board Group. Address date, October 9th, 2025, body. Based on current data projections, the proposed builds on the North Ridge are at significant structural risk. We strongly advise pausing development until minimum mitigation protocols are applied, including deep-set anchors and slope grading adjustments. I flipped the page, from Denise McAllister to Carl Jefferson Body. If we publicize that we lose the November vote, remove it from the packet and keep it internal. We'll call it a preliminary analysis. Carl's response, agreed. I'll adjust the agenda wording to say weather projections are within seasonal norms. No need to start a panic. They buried an engineering hazard report to avoid losing a vote. I scanned every line. Emails exchanged between HOA board members, contractors, and one of the county zoning advisors. Some of the messages were forwarded. Others were blind copied. All of them revealed the same pattern: manipulation, concealment, collusion. I took a highlighter and marked every line where a risk was acknowledged but hidden. By the end, the pages glowed yellow like crime scene tape. I bundled the emails and sent a copy to Matthew. He called within minutes. This isn't just HOA corruption. This is insurance fraud waiting to explode. How so, I asked. If they filed for coverage on those homes claiming compliance with snow load standards while knowingly suppressing warnings, that's felony-level misrepresentation. The insurance companies could walk. The homeowners would be left with nothing. I went quiet, because that meant dozens of innocent neighbors, people who hadn't joined our group who didn't know what we knew. They might lose everything. We had to act. We composed a memo. Not a public blast, not yet. Just a targeted communication to the HOA's liability insurer, the State Zoning Review Board, and the Construction Permit Office. We attached the Weatherstone report, the email thread, a side-by-side of what the HOA claimed versus what they received, a video still from the nighttime construction, a quote from the Ridgeview Resilience Initiative ledger line. I titled the packet Pattern of Concealment and Fraud, Ridgeview HOA. We didn't sign our names. Instead, we marked it as Community Integrity Committee, Concerned Members. We sent it certified mail with proof of receipt. Within 48 hours, we got our first signal back. The county zoning office issued a temporary permit hold on all HOA developments pending clarification of documentation inconsistencies. The board panicked. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Closed door invite only. But Sandra still had the Zoom link. She forwarded it to me, Jasmine, and Matthew. We joined in silence with our mics and cameras off. What we saw was fear. Carl's voice shook. The state just asked for all documents we submitted related to Phase 3. Everything. Denise muttered something about rephrasing timeline narratives. Then Brenda chimed in. We have to expel them, Nate, Jasmine, Sandra. Anyone who's spreading this, they're undermining our authority. That was it. The nail. Proof of retaliation recorded timestamped part of a pattern. I clipped the video and saved it to the evidence vault. The very next day, Matthew filed a formal civil injunctive petition with the Flathead County Superior Court. We asked for immediate halt to all construction, freeze of HOA, discretionary accounts, court-supervised audit of HOA finances protection order preventing retaliatory action against named whistleblowers. It was a bold move. But we had the evidence, and the ridge didn't lie. That night, Jasmine called, her voice shaking. My neighbor's wall is cracking, Nate. Like, actually separating. She's hearing groaning at night. I grabbed my Boots flashlight and recorder. By the time I reached Lot 53, the snow was knee-deep. Her back wall had bowed inward. There was a long, horizontal crack running through the drywall. When I pressed my ear to it, I heard what sounded like a slow, splintering breathwood under pressure. I stepped back and turned to the woman. Nina. Do you have renter's insurance? She shook her head. Eyes wide. Call your family. Stay with someone else tonight. What about the HOA? They won't help you. Not now. As I walked back through the snow, the wind cut against my jacket, howling low. But in that sound, I felt something rising. Not just anger, but momentum. We weren't hiding anymore. And the ridge was groaning louder every night. It happened at 4:38 a.m. I was awake already, couldn't sleep, not with everything teetering the way it was. The snow had been falling for 13 straight hours, not flakes, slabs. It came down like weight from heaven. I was staring at the live feed from the trail cam I'd rigged 2 weeks earlier. It overlooked the Ridgeview Phase 3, builds 5 houses, framed and wrapped in plastic sheeting, their outlines barely visible beneath layers of white. Then, a low rumble. I blinked, leaned closer to the screen. The snow shifted like a wave, and in less than 5 seconds, the center frame, Lot 49, tilted. The roof bent inward like a crushed can. Support beams cracked one by one. Then it fell, just collapsed into itself. A muffled crash swallowed by wind and snow. Gone. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Just watched, stunned as a structure I documented, warned about, fought against, vanished under the weight of its own deceit. Lot 49 had been the model home, the one in all their flyers, the one with winterproof design in bold letters. I grabbed my jacket and ran out the door, boots sinking deep into drifts. Half the streetlights were out. The storm made the sky glow like the inside of a snow globe. By the time I got to the ridge, other homes had lights on. Figures were appearing in windows. One neighbor opened their front door and screamed, "Is it real? Is it true?" I nodded, still winded. "It's down." Behind me, Jasmine appeared wrapped in 3 coats, her breath visible in sharp gasps. "I heard it," she said. From across the gully, sounded like the earth was cracking. We stood there as first responders rolled in. No one had been inside. The house hadn't been officially sold yet. That at least was mercy. But the other homes still standing barely. Lot 50's frame had bowed. A structural beam on 52 had shifted. Windows on 48 were iced over from the inside, a clear sign of failed insulation and interior moisture. I filmed everything. No narration, just the evidence. Time-stamped, geotagged, uploaded. By noon, the local news vans arrived. Was this an act of God? One reporter asked me. I looked her straight in the eye. No. This was an act of greed. The story spread fast. Model home collapses under snow. Residents say HOA ignored warnings. Trail cam footage contradicts HOA's safety claims. Whistleblowers say collapse was inevitable and preventable. And then, the board vanished. Denise didn't return calls. Carl's truck was seen leaving town. The HOA office remained locked, lights off, blinds drawn. But that night, something unexpected happened. A private email leaked. From Brenda, the secretary to the HOA's legal counsel. We knew the risk, and we still pushed forward. If the court finds out about the ledger alterations, we're sunk. I don't know who leaked it. Maybe Sandra. Maybe another board member having a crisis of conscience. But it broke everything open. The next day, the Flathead County Court approved our emergency petition. All Phase 3 construction was ordered. Immediately, halted HO. Discretionary funds were frozen pending investigation. An independent forensic audit was ordered within 15 days, and perhaps most importantly, no HOA member could be fined, penalized, or expelled without court review. For the first time in months, I felt something crack not beneath my feet, but in the air. The silence, the fear, the grip. It was breaking. We called an emergency town hall meeting that night, held it in the school gym. Packed wall to wall, every neighbor who'd been silenced, fined, ignored, or just afraid to speak finally showed up. Jasmine opened with the footage. Then Caleb read the ledger entries out loud. And then I stepped forward, held up the Weatherstone report. They buried this. I tapped the paper. They said the storm wasn't a threat. They said I was spreading fear. They fined us, threatened liens. But it wasn't us who endangered this community. It was them. Silence. Then someone clapped. Then more. Soon the entire room was applauding, not for me, not for vengeance, but because the lie had been exposed and the weight of it had finally fallen where it belonged. On them. Buried under their own build. By the time the gym doors opened, they had to turn people away at the parking lot. The storm had begun to slow, but not before leaving the town caked in ice and anger. And the collapse of Lot 49 had changed everything. No one trusted the board anymore. But for the first time, they were ready to listen to each other. Inside the room buzzed with nervous energy. Rows of folding chairs scraped against the hardwood floor. Neighbors who hadn't made eye contact in months now whispered with urgency. Even people who had voted for Phase 3 were here, faces pale, eyes wide. Some had kids sitting beside them, clutching gloves and cocoa, like it was the end of something big. At 6 o'clock sharp, I walked up to the podium. The microphone let out a whine, then steadied. Before we begin, I said, voice firm but calm, I want everyone here to know this meeting is being recorded. Audio, video, time-stamped. No edits, no spin, just truth. There was a murmur of approval. Behind me on the projector screen was a slideshow I had spent all day preparing. I clicked the remote. Slide 1, a wide drone shot of the Ridgeview Ridge before the build, clean, quiet, pristine. Slide 2, Weatherstone's buried snowpack report. Slide 3, a side-by-side, what the HOA claimed in public versus what they knew in private. Slide 4, trail cam footage, trucks at 2:12 a.m. Slide 5 FLIR. Images of moisture leak and thermal fractures. Then I let the next slide speak for itself. HOA General Ledger $43,200 paid to shell company, run by board VP gasps. I stepped aside and let Matthew take over. He didn't use notes, didn't need them. He laid it out like a case file, showed how the snow removal budget had been funneled into false contracts, how Clear Sky Events had no tax ID, how multiple vendors shared the same P.O. box in Missoula, how at least $110,000 over the last 9 months had been misappropriated or unaccounted for. And then, Jasmine took the mic. She spoke slowly, eyes on the audience, not the slides. "I'm a nurse," she said. "I worked back-to-back shifts through 2 COVID waves. I shoveled snow at 4 a.m. before heading to 12-hour ER shifts. And they fined me for a bird feeder." Her voice cracked, but she held it. They tried to scare us into silence, but I've seen what silence costs in an emergency. And this, she gestured behind her, was an emergency. The room was still. Then Sandra walked forward. Quiet Sandra, who once counted HOA fines and dues like pennies in a church bowl. She held up a printed email. This is an email from Brenda, the HOA secretary to the board's lawyer. She says, and I quote, "If the court finds out about the ledger alterations, we're sunk." People gasped again. Then came the first real question from the crowd. A man stood up, big coat, bigger voice. "So what do we do?" "We can't trust them. Can't wait for the audit. They're hiding, lying." "Are we just supposed to sit in our homes while our walls crack?" "No," I said. "That's why we're here." I clicked the next slide. Community Action Plan, Recall, Freeze Reform. One by one, I laid it out. 1. Recall vote petition legal under Montana Code, Section 352616, requiring 10% of signatures to trigger. 2. Asset protection. The court had already issued a freeze on HOA discretionary spending. 3. Forensic audit oversight. A third-party CPA group was now required to review 2 years of HOA transactions. 4. Temporary Oversight Committee. We proposed a new 3-person interim board, elected by tonight's attendees, to represent member interests during investigation. And then I said it clearly, if you want this HOA to change, you need to sign. Tonight. I walked to the long table in the back. On it, 3 clipboards, stacks of signature sheets, pens, witness lines, legal templates verified by Matthew. And people lined up. First in trickles, then in waves. Within 15 minutes, we had over 80 signatures. That was double the minimum required for a recall vote. Some neighbors cried as they signed. Others laughed nervously, like people stepping out of a long, quiet nightmare. But one moment froze me. It was Caleb. He signed, then walked up and handed me a small black folder. Inside photographs, dated receipts, original bylaws from Ridgeview's founding, and a letter from his late wife who had once chaired the community's very first HOA meeting 22 years ago. The letter ended with this: "This community must be built on trust, not fear. If ever it drifts from that, someone must pull it back." I read the line aloud, and the gym went quiet again, except for the sound of people still signing. By 9 p.m., we had 134 names. The next step was formal notice. But the tide had already turned. When I stepped outside, the snow had stopped. The wind was calmer. And for the first time in weeks, I saw a sky full of stars. It wasn't over. Not yet. But tonight, the town wasn't afraid anymore. 3 days after the town meeting, I found the letter wedged beneath my front door. No envelope, no return address, just folded cardstock, heavy and clean. Inside one line, Office of the Montana Attorney General, interested in your materials, discreet meeting. Below it, a date, a time, and a place. Flathead County Courthouse, Room 2, B Thursday, 10 a.m. My hands went cold. This wasn't a reporter. This wasn't a neighborhood rumor mill or a city code enforcer. This was the state. I wore a charcoal coat and gloves to the courthouse, trying to look as civilian as possible. Room 2B was tucked in the back, unmarked. I pushed the door open to find a tall woman already inside, no nameplate, just a plain black folder on the desk in front of her. She looked up. "Mr. Harlan?" I nodded. "Call me Ava," she said. "Special Investigations Unit. I read your FOIA pull and ledger attachments. You've stirred something." She didn't smile. I sat. "We've had 3 separate complaints about Ridgeview's board over the past 2 years," Ava continued. "But nothing actionable. Not until now." She opened the folder. Inside were printouts of everything we'd gathered. The altered ledger lines, the Weatherstone report, the trail cam footage stills, email threads showing knowledge and concealment, and the voice recording of Carl and Denise planning retaliatory fines. "Is the grand jury real?" I asked. She nodded. "A local one. We've convened it quietly. They're already reviewing the financials." That hit harder than I expected, because it meant someone somewhere was officially treating our evidence like the criminal matter it truly was. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Testimony. Documentation. Chain of custody for the files." She paused. "And your protection list. Anyone you believe may be targeted next." That night, I sat at my kitchen table and filled out the affidavit package. It took hours. Each section asked for timestamps, file names, storage locations. But I had it all. I'd spent weeks treating this like a case file. Now it was one. When I submitted the full document, Ava added one last note. "If we find clear self-dealing or coordinated fraud, we will pursue criminal charges under Title 45 and Title 76. It was happening. Meanwhile, Ridgeview's board was falling apart. Carl posted a cryptic message in the HOA portal. "Certain materials have been misrepresented. Please withhold judgment." Denise hadn't been seen in days. And Brenda, she showed up at my door that Saturday. She looked like she hadn't slept. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I was just keeping minutes." Denise and Carl told me what to write. I didn't know about the accounts, not really. I stood in the doorway. "Do you want to testify?" She hesitated. I think so, but I'm scared." I nodded. "I'll add you to the protection list." Brenda gave me a USB drive before leaving. Inside were 15 unedited meeting recordings, ones never posted publicly. They revealed that Phase 3 had been greenlit before the soil report even arrived. That multiple bids were awarded to shell contractors without competitive review, and that HOA funds were used to reimburse Carl for travel expenses that included hotel stays in Idaho during a ski trip in the name of terrain studies. By Monday, Ava had the files. Her response was short. "This changes things. We're expanding the scope." The grand jury now had access to financial misconduct, retaliation, permit manipulation, insurance, misrepresentation, and now personal enrichment with community funds. But the board wasn't done. That week, they tried to call an emergency vote to dissolve the recall committee. It failed spectacularly. Only 4 members voted in favor. Over 130 abstained or voted no, because the fear had broken. We held a press conference that Thursday, outside the Ridgeview HOA office, snow melting off the eaves behind us. Matthew spoke first, flanked by Jasmine, Caleb, and me. "We are not anti-HOA," he said clearly. "We are pro-accountability, and this community deserves it." Then I took the mic. "This isn't personal, it's structural. They built unsafe homes with public funds, hid critical safety data, and punished anyone who spoke up. That's not governance. That's abuse." Cameras flashed. The next morning, Ava called me again. "You'll be pleased," she said. "The grand jury just issued its first round of subpoenas. HOA board members. Their shell LLCs, bank records, MULs, all of it. Real legal weight, real consequences." That night, I stood on my porch again and looked out over the ridge. Lot 49 was still buried, but now it had a yellow tape perimeter. State engineers were on-site cataloging structural failings, and something else had shifted too. Neighbors waved when they walked by. People shoveled each other's drives again. The silence that once ruled Ridgeview had cracked, and with it the power of those who thrived in the dark. We were still in a storm. But this time, we weren't alone. The vote came faster than any of us expected. Once the grand jury subpoenas hit, the board had no way to stall. Their attempt to dissolve the recall committee had failed. Their lawyer had withdrawn, and at least 2 board members had been served subpoenas in person. Still, the HOA tried one last card confusion. They posted an urgent bulletin to the member portal. Due to unsafe weather and alleged procedural inconsistencies, the recall vote is hereby postponed. But it was a bluff. We'd already filed the legal paperwork with the county backed by state code. The vote wasn't theirs to control anymore. It belonged to the residents. On March 3rd, inside the community center where it all began, every eligible homeowner filed in. Snow still clung to the eaves. The power flickered once from wind, but the lights held. I stood by the door with Jasmine and Caleb, clipboard in hand, counting each arrival. Sandra oversaw the ballot box, while Matthew acted as legal observer. When Denise arrived, face pale, eyes darting, no one spoke. She cast her vote and left within minutes. Carl never showed. Brenda was last to arrive. She walked in slow shoulders, hunched hands trembling slightly. When she dropped her vote into the box, she looked up at me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know," I said. At 7 p.m. sharp, we closed the box, counted in the open. Every ballot read aloud. And by the time we reached the final row, it was no longer close. 112 in favor of recall, 17 against. The crowd let out a sound somewhere between relief and triumph. No cheering, just breath. For the first time in a long time, people exhaled. The Ridgeview HOA board was officially dissolved. 3 temporary community trustees were appointed until new elections could be held: Sandra, Jasmine, and myself. We weren't politicians. We weren't power-seekers. We were residents who'd been pushed too far and finally pushed back. But the legal storm wasn't over, not by a long shot. That same week, Ava called. The AG's office is issuing a motion to freeze all Ridgeview HOA operational accounts pending the audit. I nodded slowly, gripping the phone tighter. "How much money are we talking about?" "Just over $480,000, she said. "That includes reserve funds, pending vendor payments, and discretionary community improvement accounts. Any signs of offshore transfers? Not yet. But we did find unusual movement between 2 accounts during the last storm. One routed through a property management company Carl used in 2023. She paused. "Nate, there may be deeper fraud here than we thought." We both went quiet. Then I asked the question I'd been dreading. "Is the insurance payout for the collapsed home at risk?" "It's already suspended," she said. The insurer flagged material misrepresentation on the original permit filings, meaning no one gets a dime until the fraud is cleared or prosecuted. The news hit like ice water. I walked outside into the wind and looked up at the ridge. Lot 49 was still just a mound. Framing debris, plastic tarp flapping. But now it was also a symbol, a warning, and a gravestone for the way things used to work around here. That week, I hosted the first open financial review in Ridgeview's history. Printed ledgers projected balances, full visibility. No secrets. Neighbors filed in like it was a town hall revival. People asked real questions. Why was $7,800 spent on community media outreach during December? Why were we paying $1,200 per month to a landscaping firm that stopped showing up in October? Why did we buy 300 embroidered HOA windbreakers? No one had answers. But that was okay, because now, those questions had power. Now those questions led to change. We voted to freeze all non-essential spending. No new development approvals without soil reviews. No contracting without 3 public bids. And we hired a CPA, independent state, approved to conduct the forensic audit. 2 days later, the auditor, Elaine Greer, called me directly. "I've only just begun," she said, "but I can already tell. They cooked the books. Hard." I sighed. How bad? About $170,000 appears completely undocumented. Either it's in someone's pocket, or it was never there to begin with. We scheduled a public audit release for the following month. But something else came out first. Brenda, guilt-heavy and voice-cracking, wrote a signed affidavit detailing how Denise and Carl pressured her to backdate meeting minutes, invent vendor names, and flag known whistleblowers for non-compliance watch. Her statement read like a confession and a warning. "I let it happen," she wrote, "because I thought it would pass, but it didn't pass. It grew. And I let it grow because I was afraid." But fear has no place in community. We posted her letter publicly, at the clubhouse, on the HOA portal, and outside the old HOA office, now sealed shut, padlocked with a court notice taped to the door. Under state investigation. People stopped by reading in silence. Some nodded, some cried. But all of them stayed longer than I expected. Because Brenda's words said what many felt, that this wasn't just about money, or snow, or a house buried in white. It was about who we became when fear ruled, and who we could become now that it didn't. Spring didn't arrive with warmth. It came with silence. The kind of quiet that feels earned, like a wound finally closed but still aching when touched. The snow began to melt in mid-April, slow at first, then faster. Lot 49 reappeared beneath the thaw. All that was left of the model home was a heap of splintered wood, warped insulation, and one twisted gutter like a snapped limb. No one's name had ever been tied to the deed. In a way, it had always been a shell, just like the companies that built it. The court-appointed structural engineer filed the final report 2 weeks later. Framing design had failed under predictable snow load. No anchor bolts, no waterproof barrier, no compliance with Montana Code Section 506-0203. Site was rushed, unreinforced, and improperly graded. One line hit me hardest. Collapse was foreseeable and preventable. It echoed what I'd said to the reporter weeks earlier. This wasn't an act of God, it was an act of greed. And now, at last, it had a paper trail to prove it. The AG's office made the first arrests in May. Carl Jefferson charged with felony fraud and misappropriation of community funds. Denise McAllister hit with conspiracy document falsification and civil racketeering under Montana's pattern of behavior statutes. Brenda cooperated and was spared indictment. She's since moved to a nearby town, still writes me sometimes, says she's taking care of her mother, that she doesn't plan to serve on any board ever again. Can't blame her. The audit report dropped like a hammer. Nearly $230,000 had vanished across fake invoices, duplicate payments, and no-bid contracts routed through friends and cousins of board members. One company had been billing for monthly snow removal in July. The community was stunned, but not surprised. We held the election for the new board in June. Jasmine won unanimously, Caleb too. And Sandra stayed on, nervous but resolute. I declined to run. I'd done what I came to do. And besides, I knew my role had always been something else, not to govern, but to reveal. Still, they kept a chair open for me during the first meeting, just in case. We passed a dozen new measures that week: mandatory external audits every fiscal year, community vote required for any contract over $10,000, recorded public meetings with searchable transcripts, a hotline for whistleblower complaints routed outside the board, and perhaps most importantly, bylaw banning retaliation for member speech. We called it the Ridgeview Transparency Act, the first of its kind in the state. A few other HOAs asked for copies. We gave them freely. Let it spread, we said. Let it reach places where silence still reigns. The town changed. You could feel it in the way people spoke to each other again. How they paused at mailboxes, waved at the end of driveways. How they asked questions, not to attack but to understand. I spent more time in my garage again, fixing old tools, cleaning up. One day I found the bulletin board I'd built during those long nights spinned with red string photos printouts. I stared at the word I'd written in Sharpie all those months ago: lies. I took it down, burned it in the fire pit. Not because it wasn't true, but because we weren't ruled by it anymore. The truth had spoken, and it had done its job. On the first truly warm evening of summer, Jasmine invited the whole neighborhood to her backyard. We grilled, laughed, let the kids run through sprinklers. Someone brought up Lot 49. What'll we do with the space, a neighbor asked. Jasmine looked over. We were thinking, a memorial garden. Something simple, something honest. People nodded. It felt right. The next morning, I dug the first hole. Not deep, just enough for a small cherry tree. As I lowered the roots in, I thought about everything that had come up from the soil, the lies, the weight, the pressure, and what we had done with it. Turned it into something else, something living. Before I covered the roots, I slipped a small metal tag into the dirt, stamped with a date. The day we took it back. Not just the land, not just the HOA, but each other, the community, and ourselves.